Daniel Morgan had built his restaurant empire from a single cafe into a nationwide chain, but he knew success had a way of creating blind spots. Too many executives, he thought, spent their lives in boardrooms far from the kitchens and dining rooms that kept the lights on. So he traded his tailored suit for a faded polo shirt and an apron with a faint coffee stain, slipping anonymously into one of his busiest locations as a new hire. It was near closing time on his third night, and the restaurant was quiet, lit only by the warm amber glow of the pendant lamps above the booths. The air smelled faintly of garlic butter and fresh bread, the last batch of rolls still cooling on the counter. Staff moved in a slower rhythm now, sweeping floors and stacking chairs, their conversations turning to weekend plans and late-night snacks. That's when he saw her. Emma, a waitress with tired eyes but an easy smile, lingered near the bread station. She didn't move with the lazy energy of winding down a shift, her steps were deliberate. Daniel watched as she reached for the basket, her fingers brushing over the golden crusts as though she were selecting the best pieces. She wrapped each roll carefully in napkins, sliding them into a small, worn canvas bag. She glanced around the room, not with the jittery panic of a thief, but with the caution of someone who didn't want to be seen. Daniel stayed still in the corner, his hand paused over the dish rack. She gave no sign of noticing him. In another life, in another mood, he might have thought she was pocketing snacks for herself, an innocent, if technically against the rules, act. But there was something in the way she did it, slow, gentle, almost protective, that made him think there was more to this ritual than hunger. As Emma walked out into the chilly night, the door chime jingled softly behind her, leaving Daniel with the lingering scent of warm bread and a knot of questions in his mind. The next evening, Daniel arrived for his shift early, determined to see if last night's quiet mystery was a one-time occurrence or part of something bigger. The restaurant was busier that night, families sharing pasta dishes, couples leaning close over wineglasses, the steady clatter of cutlery and bursts of laughter filling the air. He kept his head down, polishing glasses at the bar while keeping an unobtrusive eye on Emma. She worked with the grace of someone who had learned to mask exhaustion. Her uniform was neatly pressed, but her shoes told another story, scuffed leather and frayed seams from countless miles walked between tables. She smiled at customers, remembered drink orders without writing them down, and never let her tray clatter when her arms trembled from fatigue. As the dinner rush faded and the last plates were carried away, the mood shifted. Staff members chatted in low voices while wiping down booths. The sound of a dishwasher hummed steadily in the back. Emma moved toward the bread station again, almost as if pulled there by an invisible thread. Daniel noticed her pause, glancing briefly toward the kitchen door as if to be sure no one was watching. Then, with the same delicate precision as before, she began her ritual, selecting rolls, wrapping them in napkins, and tucking them into her bag. The bread was still warm, a thin wisp of steam curled into the air when she folded the napkin over it. This time, Daniel paid closer attention. There was no rush in her movements, no greed in the way she gathered the food. Instead, there was an odd tenderness, like a parent packing lunch for a child. She adjusted the bag's strap across her shoulder, her expression unreadable but heavy with thought. Technically, she was breaking the rules. Company policy was strict. Leftover bread was to be discarded at closing to avoid health risks and liability issues. As CEO, Daniel had approved that policy himself years ago without hesitation. But watching her now, the rule felt almost absurd. These rolls, destined for the trash, were being treated as though they were treasure. When Emma slipped out into the cool night air, Daniel stood frozen at his post, polishing cloth idle in his hands. Something was different about her actions, something more human than corporate logic could account for. And though part of him wanted to confront her immediately, another part knew the truth would be clearer if he waited just a little longer. By the fourth night, Daniel's curiosity had grown into a quiet obsession. He had replayed the image of Emma's hands folding bread in his mind more times than he could count. Tonight, he decided, he wouldn't just watch, he would ask. The shift had been long, filled with a steady stream of customers who seemed to linger extra over dessert. By the time the last table was cleared, the staff moved in a slow, tired rhythm. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables, the vacuum hummed softly in the dining area, and the smell of the day's cooking clung to the air like a memory. Daniel noticed Emma heading toward the bread station again. The basket held the last of the evening's rolls, still giving off a faint, yeasty warmth. She repeated her careful ritual, napkin, fold, sliding each piece into the same worn canvas bag. Her brow furrowed slightly, as though her thoughts were far away. He waited until she tied the bag's drawstring before speaking. Long day. His voice was casual, but the question made her stiffen slightly. She turned to face him, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Always, she replied, adjusting the strap on her shoulder. He nodded toward her bag. You always take bread home. For a brief moment, her eyes widened, and the smile vanished. She hesitated, the silence between them stretching until it felt heavy. Daniel could almost see the calculations flicker behind her gaze. Should she lie, brush it off, or tell the truth? Finally, she exhaled slowly. It's for my neighbors, she said, her tone quiet but steady. They're an elderly couple. Their pension barely covers rent, and they won't ask anyone for help. I know they don't always eat enough, so I bring what I can. She paused, looking down at the floor before adding, and my little brother. He's 9. Lives with me now. The words were simple, but the weight behind them hit Daniel like a slow wave. There was no self-pity in her voice, no attempt to turn the moment into a plea for sympathy. Just a matter of fact truth about lives held together by small acts of care. Emma shifted the bag on her shoulder again, as if eager to leave before the conversation could go any further. Anyway, she said lightly, they'll be waiting. Without another glance, she pushed through the door into the night, leaving Daniel standing among the empty tables, wondering how many other quiet stories like hers his company had been blind to. That night, Daniel didn't go straight home. He sat in his car in the dimly lit parking lot long after the restaurant had gone dark, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, watching the occasional car pass on the quiet street. He had come undercover expecting to find inefficiencies, sloppy table service, missed upselling opportunities, maybe even theft that could be stamped out with better management. Instead, he had stumbled onto something that didn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. Emma's words replayed in his mind, they'll be waiting. He imagined her walking home along narrow sidewalks, the night air cool against her cheeks, carrying that bag of bread like it was worth more than gold. He pictured her knocking on a door where an elderly couple would greet her with tired smiles, or setting the bread on a kitchen table where a little boy's eyes would light up. The absurdity of it hit him. Just hours earlier, those same roles had been considered waste. He remembered the corporate meetings where the food waste policy had been a bullet point among dozens. No one had ever stopped to ask whether what they were throwing away might be exactly what someone else needed to get through the night. In the restaurant business, numbers ruled everything: cost per plate, table turnover rate, quarterly revenue. But this wasn't about numbers. This was about something he couldn't measure: dignity. Daniel leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The truth was, he'd been running his company from a safe height, far enough away that the human details blurred. Employees were names on payroll reports, customers were line items on sales charts, and food was product. But tonight, he saw it differently. Tonight, food was kindness wrapped in a napkin, carried quietly through the dark. He realized then that he couldn't just let it go. The rules might make sense on paper, but the paper didn't tell the whole story. And now that he'd seen the human side, he wasn't sure he could go back to pretending he hadn't. The next evening, Daniel arrived with a decision already made. He no longer wanted to simply observe, he wanted to act. The quiet weight of Emma's story had followed him through the day like a shadow, tugging at him during conference calls, interrupting his focus during lunch. By the time he stepped into the restaurant for his shift, he knew this would be the night everything changed. The hours passed in a blur of orders and table clearings. Daniel kept his eyes on Emma, watching the way she balanced plates, offered refills without being asked, and smiled in a way that made customers feel like they mattered. He found himself wondering how long she'd been carrying responsibilities far heavier than trays of pasta and pitchers of water. When closing time came, she began her now familiar ritual. The bread was still warm, the basket nearly full tonight. She wrapped each roll with her usual care, slipping them into her bag as if she were tucking a child into bed. Emma, Daniel said from across the counter, his tone steady but carrying a weight that made her look up. She paused, her hands hovering over the bread, eyes narrowing slightly. Yeah, can you stay for a minute after we close? I'd like to talk to you. Her brows drew together in a flicker of wariness, but she nodded. Sure. 15 minutes later, the dining area was empty, chairs still stacked on tables, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. Emma stood near the counter, arms folded loosely, her bag still slung over her shoulder. Daniel took a deep breath. I should tell you something. My name isn't Dan, the new dishwasher. A puzzled frown crossed her face. I'm Daniel Morgan, CEO of this restaurant chain. Her eyes widened, first confusion, then surprise, then something unreadable. She let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh. You're joking. I'm not. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And I know about the bread. Every night. Her posture stiffened, her fingers tightening around the bag's strap. If you're going to fire me, just say it. I won't argue. Daniel shook his head. No, I'm not here to fire you. I'm here because you showed me something I'd forgotten, why this business exists in the first place. Her guarded expression softened slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, as if weighing whether to trust his words. I want to start a program, he continued, to make sure food like this doesn't go to waste. We can package leftovers safely, partner with local shelters, and give employees the chance to help people who need it. It'll start here, tonight, because of you. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then Emma blinked quickly, her lips parting in surprise. You're serious? Daniel smiled. Completely. She looked down, and when she raised her eyes again, they shimmered with something that wasn't quite tears but wasn't far from it. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied gently. You've already said enough, without a single word. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant transformed in subtle but powerful ways. Daniel worked closely with Emma to design the Meals to Go program, ensuring it was safe, efficient, and respectful of both staff and recipients. Staff members who had once discarded leftovers began carefully packaging them, labeling each bundle, and tracking donations to local shelters and families in need. Daniel watched Emma lead the effort with quiet determination. Her humility and care set the tone for everyone around her. He noticed how coworkers, once indifferent to the small struggles of the neighborhood, now asked questions about the families they were helping, volunteered to deliver meals, and shared stories of how these small acts of kindness were making a tangible difference. One chilly evening, Daniel joined Emma on her usual route, carrying a bag of bread together. The elderly couple at the first stop greeted them warmly, their frail hands trembling as they accepted the food. A little boy peered from the doorway, his wide eyes lighting up at the sight of warm rolls and sandwiches. Daniel realized that this simple act of giving, was worth more than any profit margin he'd ever studied. Back at the restaurant, he reflected on what had changed in him. He had gone undercover to see the flaws, inefficiencies, and failures in his business. Instead, he had found humanity, compassion, and the quiet heroism of a young woman doing what she could to help others. Emma had reminded him that the true measure of success wasn't how much he accumulated, but how much he could give. Over time, the program expanded across all branches of his chain. Thousands of pounds of food were saved each month, reaching hundreds of families who might have gone hungry. Media coverage praised the initiative, but Daniel cared little for the accolades. What mattered was the impact, the people whose lives were touched, and the lessons learned from a waitress who had shown him the heart of his business. At night, when the restaurant was quiet and the lights dimmed, Daniel often thought back to the first evening he saw Emma slipping bread into her bag. That single moment had shifted something in him, teaching him that small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways he could never have predicted. And in that realization, he found a deeper satisfaction than he had ever known in the boardroom. He hadn't just discovered a program, a policy, or a new initiative, he had discovered empathy, and it had changed him forever.